Chapter 10 Elemental Eyes. To live as a mind governed by fire and shaped by water is not to live in the world as it is. It is to live in a world constantly refracted through the heat and liquidity of internal force. Perception is not a window, it is a mirror, warped, fogged, occasionally shattered by personality. Every moment I experience is shaped not by what occurs, but by the dominance of an element within me: fire, water, or the fragile, trembling edge where they meet and tear each other apart. The mistake we make is to believe we are seeing reality, but what we are truly seeing is ourselves, our elemental archetype filtering, twisting, amplifying the moment until what we perceive is not the thing itself, but our reaction to it. The fire lens. Fire perceives the world as a challenge. Every interaction becomes a battlefield. Every silence feels like a signal, a trap, a provocation. Fire sharpens the moment, makes it urgent, angular. When fire rules my vision, I don't just listen, I scan, I search for subtext, I anticipate betrayal, I overread, overreact, overextend. This is the curse of heat. It never rests. It interprets everything as motion or threat. Even beauty becomes suspect. Even calm demands a contingency plan. The mind under fire is always moving, always calculating. It does not trust ease, it distrusts stillness. It believes comfort dulls the edge. In fire, a compliment is often a manipulation, a delay, a personal slight. Even love is processed with suspicion. How long will it last? What does it want from me? What will it take? Fire makes me fast, makes me sharp, but it also makes me volatile. I interrupt, I dominate, I assume, I accuse before understanding. I prepare to be abandoned before I'm even held. What I call instinct is often anxiety with a match in its teeth. The water lens. Water does not demand, it yields. It takes nothing by force, but in doing so, it ends up with everything. It watches, absorbs, refracts. Underwater's gaze, the world becomes internalized. Words carry not content, but emotional sediment. Glances echo, silences throb. Tone matters more than statement. Energy matters more than logic. When water leads my mind, perception becomes immersive. I don't just witness, I merge. I feel others' grief before they speak it. I sense emotional withdrawal as physical absence. I start to fade into the shape of the moment. It sounds noble, empathy, intuition, but it is exhausting. Water offers no barrier. It doesn't distinguish between self and other. I forget where I end and you begin. I carry pain that isn't mine. I take responsibility for tensions I didn't create. I try to solve what cannot be named. This too is distortion. This too is not clarity. Water floods nuance. It overwhelms decisions with feeling. And in that saturation, I begin to drown in possibilities. Nothing feels firm. Nothing is definite. When I live in water, I become paralyzed by care, conflict, as perception. Most of the time, I am not purely fire or purely water. I am the storm where they meet. And in that clash, reality becomes blurred and jagged. A conversation that feels like a threat at noon may by evening feel like a confession of affection. An email that reads as passive aggressive today may seem entirely neutral tomorrow. What changed? Not the world, not the content, only the element in charge of the lens. This is not madness, it is elemental logic. When fire rules, my mind scans for hierarchy, for advantage. When water rules, it searches for meaning, for impact. Neither sees the world as it is. They see what they're attuned to find. And if I'm not aware of which one is holding the lens, I'll respond to the world not as it is, but as it threatens or overwhelms me to be. Intuition or archetype. People speak of intuition as a kind of wisdom, as though it's a knowing deeper than logic. And sometimes it is, but often it's just the loudest voice in the psyche. Sometimes what I call a gut feeling is actually fire, fear in fancy dress. Sometimes it's water, unprocessed pain rippling in the present. If I do not pause to ask where my knowing is coming from, what element is speaking, I risk making decisions rooted in distortion. I risk calling distortion insight. Applied perception. Let me give you an example. In fire, I walk into a meeting. Someone doesn't greet me with enthusiasm. Fire registers this as challenge. The mind sharpens. They don't respect me. I interrupt more. I raise my voice slightly. I'm not conscious of it, but my perception is already shaped by the heat. In water, I walk into the same meeting, the same silence, but water feels the temperature of the room. I worry someone is upset. I become self-conscious. I over-apologize. I hold back. Later, I replay every moment, wondering what I did wrong. Same situation, entirely different response. Neither is irrational. Both are predictable. Predictable according to which element is ascendant. The work. I have tried to stabilize, to cultivate something like earth routine, ritual, structure. It helps, it grounds, but earth is not my nature. It doesn't hold under pressure. I fall back into reaction. I've tried air too, to step back, to detach, to view things intellectually, like a cloud looking down on the storm. That works for a time, but then a glance, a phrase, a memory, and I'm yanked back into fire or flood. So the real work is not suppression, it is awareness. I ask, what am I perceiving? And more importantly, who is perceiving it? Is it my fire? Is it my water? And if I know that, then I know what to do with the reaction. Not obey it blindly, but honor it honestly. When the elements dance, there are rare days when I feel clear, not neutral, not numb, but fluid and focused, soft and sharp. Fire gives me words, water gives them shape. Fire moves me, water grounds me. Those days feel like wholeness, and I write from that place, not because I found the answer, but because I've made peace with not having one. Fire and water don't need to agree. They need only to be named, to be recognized, to be heard without being obeyed. That is what it means to see clearly, not the absence of filter, but the awareness of it. Closing the lens. This chapter will not fix perception. That was never the point. What it offers is a mirror to those who see through fire, who drown in water, who shift too often to feel stable. It offers language, because when we can name the lens, we can loosen its grip. We can stop mistaking urgency for insight. We can stop calling emotion evidence. We can pause. We can wait. We can see, not perfectly, but honestly. And in that moment of honesty, there is clarity, not because the mirror is clean, but because we know it is a mirror. Not the world, just the lens, the space between the look and the meaning. I once stared at someone for too long in conversation, not because I was in love or in awe, but because I couldn't tell if they were hiding something or simply tired. Fire wanted to interrogate, water wanted to soothe. Both made assumptions. I told myself I was reading the situation, but really I was projecting. Fire said, they're challenging you. Water said, they're withdrawing. What neither said was, they might just be quiet. They might just be human. That's the trick of element-driven perception. It personalizes everything. It turns reality into a hall of mirrors where your own shape reflects back from every surface. The fire in me says, don't let your guard down. The water says, "You're too much." Again, I rarely hear silence for what it is. I hear what I expect, threat or loss, when you can't trust your own vision. This is what they don't tell you. When you realize that your perception is elementally unstable, you lose faith in your own instincts. You begin to question every reaction. Why does this email bother me? Why does that tone feel sharp? Why does their absence feel like abandonment? Was it real? Or was it just fire at the wheel again? Or water whispering that you're being forgotten? And yet, this doesn't make life easier, it makes it more exhausting, because now you're not just dealing with the world, you're dealing with your interpretation of the world and your interpretation of your interpretation. This is not a double life, it's a double lens, and every moment must pass through both before I speak. No wonder I need so much silence. Fire says, "Don't be fooled." Fire tells me everything is urgent, that if I don't move fast, I'll be consumed, that if I don't win, I'll be erased. In meetings, it drives me to speak first. In relationships, it tells me to assert or disappear. Fire believes in dominance or death, no in between. Sometimes I admire that clarity. It gives shape to what is otherwise vague. It silences the inner noise and says, "This is the truth. Act on it." But fire is a liar too. It tells me to act before I understand. It tells me reaction is righteousness, that passion is always purpose. It seduces me with motion, and often I move too quickly, too harshly, only to realize I was never under threat, only to realize I was seeing ghosts in smoke. Water says, "Don't be hard." Water speaks differently. It doesn't rush, it drips, it pulls me under. It tells me to take more time, to consider more angles, to feel into the folds of a moment before deciding what it means. In friendship, it makes me attuned. In writing, it makes me lyrical. In conflict, it makes me hesitate. Sometimes too long, sometimes long enough to lose myself. Water makes me feel everything as personal, not in ego, but in absorption. I hear someone's tension and think, "What did I do?" I notice someone's silence and believe they're leaving. Not because I have proof, but because I feel it, and that feels like truth. Water is empathy without a border. It loves so much, it dissolves. Sight without distance. I wish I could see things with detachment, with cool observation, but the temperature of my mind is either fever or flood. I envy people who can say, "Let's wait and see." I am already 20 conclusions deep before a sentence is finished. Perception should be a tool, but when it is wired into fire or water, it becomes a trap. You don't see what is, you see what your survival instinct says you must prepare for. The challenge is not to remove the elements. I couldn't if I tried. The challenge is to remember this is the lens, not the light. The trouble with being perceptive, people call it a gift, this sensitivity, this ability to read the room. But reading a room through elemental eyes is like trying to read a book that rewrites itself every minute. You think you understand the plot, and then your internal climate shifts, and suddenly you don't trust a single page. I can walk into a room and feel everything. I know who is uncomfortable, who wants to speak but won't, who is quietly seething, who is lost in their own mind. It's not magic, it's the water reading the air, but I don't just read it, I react to it. I become responsible for it. And that is where the exhaustion begins. I do not just see what's happening, I feel I must tend to it, solve it, translate it, preempt it. Fire makes me alert, water makes me absorb. Between them, I become a conductor of other people's unspoken worlds and forget to ask whether anyone is reading mine. Love, misread. This distortion follows me into closeness. I've mistaken silence for anger. I've mistaken affection for pity. I've apologized for things no one even noticed. I've pulled away, not out of coldness, but to protect the other person from the storm I imagined they were feeling. And I've stayed too long where I should have left because water insisted they were just afraid, just wounded, just a little submerged. The truth, I don't always know what's true. I only know what I feel. And sometimes what I feel is louder than reality. Fire wants intensity. It thinks love must arrive with declarations, with heat, with certainty. Water wants to melt into the other, to become, to belong, even if it means forgetting who I was before. Neither lens sees the other clearly. I love intention, not because I don't care, but because I care too much to trust my own reaction. Elemental self-gaslighting. Over time, you learn to question even your own emotions. Did they really mean that? Did I overreact? Am I projecting? Is this intuition or paranoia? You question yourself into silence. This is the hidden cost of seeing too much through archetype. You mistrust your first instinct, then you mistrust your correction of it. You spiral, you doubt not only the world, but your ability to interpret the world. This is not self awareness, this is self erasure in slow motion. I have spent entire relationships managing perception, not connection. Entire friendships asking, how did I come across? Rather than how do I feel? It becomes a prison, not made of walls, but of reflections. The temperature of vision. Perception has a temperature. When fire rules, I see everything in reds and blacks, urgent, sharp, high contrast. When water reigns, I see the world in gray-blue gradients. Everything is mood, everything is submerged, neither is wrong, but neither is objective. This is what I must remember, that my instincts are not oracles, they are thermometers. They show the internal weather, not eternal truth. And yet I cannot help but act on them, because when your perception is elementally saturated, it doesn't feel like opinion, it feels like survival. Naming the lens. I ask constantly, who is seeing right now? What part of me is interpreting this moment? Is this flame? Is this tide? And can I sit with that knowledge before I move? Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. But the naming helps. It separates the event from the reaction. It gives me space to breathe. Fire says, respond now. Water says, feel it all. I say, wait. The mercy of context. Not everyone will understand this elemental lens. Some will call it sensitivity. Others will say I'm overthinking. Some will admire it until it turns inward and burns them or floods them. But I no longer explain it away. I no longer apologize for the shift. I live in tension. That is the lens. And from that tension, I write, I speak, I notice. It is not always clear, but it is always real. A mirror I cannot escape. Some days I wish I could live without the mirror, to move through the world as others do, lightly, confidently, without having to dissect the meaning of every pause, every tone, every misglance. I envy the ease of not needing to know, of being allowed to just be. But I was not shaped for ease. I was shaped in fire, cooled by flood. My mind does not rest against the world, it presses into it. It tests, reads, absorbs, and the moment I forget this, I begin to believe the lens is gone, that I am finally seeing clearly. That's when I'm most blind, because the most dangerous illusion is that the mirror is truth. What clarity actually is. Clarity is not about seeing without distortion. That's a myth. Clarity is knowing when distortion is present. It's being able to say, this feels sharp because fire is speaking. This feels heavy because water is grieving. This doesn't need to be resolved. It needs to be named. That naming becomes a kind of light, not to burn, not to blind, but to navigate. With that, even chaos begins to make sense, not because it simplifies, but because it situates. I can say, this is fire logic, This is water truth. This is not the world, it's the weather inside me, and I can act accordingly. And still, I see, even knowing this, I still misread people. I still take things personally. I still react from pain that has nothing to do with the present, but I recover faster. I forgive myself sooner. And in rare moments, I see not through fire, not through water, but through awareness itself, a vision that includes the distortion, a gaze that doesn't claim to be pure, but honest. That is what I trust now, not the lens, the act of looking through it, with eyes open to its heat, its depth, its blur. Final reflection. This chapter is not a doctrine, it's a field note, a dispatch from the edge of perception, written by someone who sees too much and sometimes not at all. If you understand this, then you too live in elemental tension. You too have mistaken emotion for evidence. You too have followed the whisper of your archetype and called it fate. You are not broken. You are built in heat and shaped by tide. Your perception is not a flaw. It is a language. Learn its dialect. Name its grammar. Question its tone. And when the world begins to tremble, ask not what is wrong with it. Ask what temperature your vision has become. Chapter 11. Contact Burns. Intimacy to a fire dominant psyche is not comfort, it is threat, not in the way violence is a threat, but in the way rain is to flame, connection, closeness. These are not neutral events, they are pressures, they invite the possibility of extinguishment. I have loved others in the way a flame loves oxygen, greedily, urgently, destructively. I have pulled them close, not to warm them, but to sustain myself. And when they could no longer feed the fire, I felt not loss, but betrayal. That is the danger of contact for someone like me. It is never simple, never easy. There is no such thing as casual closeness. All contact to fire is risk. When I first felt deep connection, I mistook the feeling for freedom, the rush of being seen, desired, mirrored. It fed me like kindling. I was alight with it. I wrote more, thought faster, moved through the world with new clarity. But clarity is not truth. It is focus, and focus can blind. I saw the other not as they were, but as a reflection of my fire. Everything they gave me was evidence. Every silence, a challenge. Every disagreement, a threat to combustion. It wasn't connection I needed. It was fuel. Fire perceives contact as negotiation. Who yields first? Who holds ground? Who dares to demand more? So much of my emotional life has been shaped by the need to remain unconsumed. The paradox is brutal. I want closeness, but not surrender. I want to be seen, but not studied. I want to be held, but not changed. When someone truly sees me, really senses me, I do not melt. I ignite. I feel exposed, combustible, vulnerable, not in a soft cinematic way, but in the way dry brush fears the spark. People have called me intense, not as a compliment, as a warning. It took me years to understand that what they were reacting to wasn't rudeness or ego. It was my inability to reduce the volume of my perception. When I connect, I do so at full temperature. I cannot do surface. I cannot perform mild. This is not romantic. It is exhausting. There is no middle ground for fire. I am either distant or engulfed. I either withhold or consume. When I care in monologues. When I detach, it is total. It frightens people, rightly so. The fire makes me persuasive, magnetic, articulate. It also makes me dangerous, not in the way people think of danger, not physically, emotionally, existentially, because to be loved by fire is to be tested constantly. I have destroyed relationships with nothing more than expectation. I demanded understanding, depth, immediacy. I had no tolerance for latency. I could not abide the slowness of another's emotional pace. If someone needed time, I saw it as withdrawal. If someone needed space, I saw it as abandonment. This is how fire reads distance, as insult. The worst part is that I know better. I know intellectually that people move differently. That closeness for one is not closeness for another. But fire is not intellectual, it is visceral. In the moment, I do not think, I burn, and later, in the ash, I analyze. There were moments in connection, deep, charged, vulnerable, where I could feel the fire flare, the impatience, the sudden edge in my voice, the way my body leaned forward, as if closing the gap could restore some imagined equilibrium. But what I was really doing was interrogating. Do you still see me? Are you still here? Will you leave? Not in words, but in temperature. Closeness, when fire rules, is never neutral. It is vigilance. You monitor every expression, every delay in response. You replay conversations. You look for cracks, not because you distrust them, because you distrust your place in their world. And fire does not tolerate uncertainty. It fills every silence with meaning, and that meaning is almost always threat. There is a reason I retreat, a reason I hold others at arm's length even as I long for their nearness, because proximity invites combustion, because intimacy leaves no place to hide, because I do not yet know how to touch without scorching. But I am learning to lower the heat, to let affection be quiet, to let connection unfold instead of erupting, to let the self be seen without performance. There is no fire without risk, but not all contact has to burn. Some can glow, and in that glow, I begin to believe in warmth, not as hunger, not as proof, but as presence. The myth of mutual temperature. I used to believe that love meant becoming the same temperature, that two people could somehow calibrate to the same elemental rhythm, fire with fire, or fire with something that could hold fire without turning to smoke. But people have different internal climates. They come from water, from earth, from air. They interpret heat differently. What is passion to me is panic to them. What is silence to them is rejection to me. We don't see the same weather even when standing in the same storm. This mismatch doesn't mean failure. But without language, without elemental awareness, it becomes a war of misperception. They say, "You're overwhelming." I say, "I'm present." They ask for space. I feel abandoned. And we both walk away thinking the other never really saw us. Fire's love is a language of urgency. There's no stillness in my affection. If I love you, you'll know, but you may not know how to survive it. Fire doesn't court, it declares. It doesn't wait for the right moment. It makes the moment. This makes me powerful and impossible, because not everyone wants to be pulled into heat. Some want to be invited slowly, gently. They want to linger at the threshold, to breathe before stepping closer. But fire sees hesitation as hesitance, and hesitance as danger. I step back too late, or not at all. This isn't intentional harm, but it is harm, because even good fire burns. The interrogation of intimacy. When I love, I interrogate, not overtly, but energetically. I need to know, will you stay? Do you still see me? Can you hold this heat? I won't ask these directly. I'll look for clues in tone, in absence, in the rhythm of your replies. I will scan everything you say for meaning you did not intend, because fire listens not to words, but to flicker. I need certainty, and if you cannot offer it, I will create it, even if it means imagining a threat that isn't there. Fire would rather destroy connection than risk being extinguished within it. That is the cruelty of fear shaped by flame. It mistakes withdrawal for betrayal, even when it's just breath. Rejection isn't pain, it's proof. When I'm turned away, not necessarily from romance, but from any emotional invitation, I do not feel simple sadness, I feel verification. Rejection doesn't surprise me. It confirms the oldest belief I carry that fire is too much. I don't hear no, I hear see, you are too intense, too loud, too fast, too alive. I retreat not out of hurt, but out of a sense of inevitability. I become colder than necessary, sharper than intended. I mask hurt with indifference because fire cannot afford to smolder. It must either blaze or extinguish. This is not self protection. This is fire pretending it doesn't need oxygen. But it does. I do. What remains after the burn, after the flame recedes, after the conversation ends, the distance settles, the bond breaks, something begins that is harder than the combustion itself, the analysis. I replay every word I spoke, every sentence I interrupted, every moment I came on too strong. I look for signs, for causes, for cracks that might have been mine. This isn't growth, it's ash sifting. I do not mourn the person, I mourn the fire they reflected back to me. I mourn the version of myself that was visible only through their warmth. When they leave, I feel not just alone, but invisible, not just wounded, but reduced. Learning not to burn everything, I am learning, slowly, painfully, consistently, learning that not every pause is abandonment, that not every change in tone is a shift in love, that silence is not an insult, that someone else's need for distance is not a denial of my worth. I am learning to regulate my own temperature, to catch myself when I start rising, to hold a beat before I leap, to let affection breathe. Sometimes this feels like suffocation, like self restriction, but more often now it feels like skill, like mercy, because I do not want to be a wildfire. I want to be a hearth, letting love be gentle. It is a revelation to let love arrive quietly, to stop measuring connection by intensity, to stop performing affection like a monologue, to learn that presence can be enough, that sometimes the most powerful thing I can do is wait. Wait without demanding, wait without panic, wait without reading too much into the delay. This is the opposite of how I was built, but not the opposite of what I can become, because even fire can evolve. It doesn't have to erupt to be felt. It can simply warm,